Hello, and welcome everyone, and I am presenting about the problem of practice of preventing inconsistent enforcement of ethical standards. When I looked at this is something that I look at the organization I'm part of at Crabapple Lane to really develop consistency and trust, as everything that we work upon as educators really is based on ethical standards, building that trust in the community, building it with teachers, and being fair and impartial so that there's equity across the board. This course has taught me a lot of looking at it through different frames. And as part of that, I look at this as creating um, a professional piece that will not only present information, but help me going forward as my role as principal. So the first thing that I really look at it in four teams: is ethical leadership, the ethical team, the ethical as an organization, and then challenges, and systems that would be in place. So first, under ethical leadership, it really is built upon building consistency and transparency and integrity to build that relational trust. Relational trust is built over time and actions. So this isn't something that will happen day one, but it's as an organization of us committing to it as the leadership, but also the entire staff of building it through those actions. In order to build that, the looking at the relational ethical leadership and relational trust, it really has to have a set system that you're going to be putting in place. How are you going to handle those difficult situations, because they will come across? How are you going to handle those conflicts? And are you going to be able to do it with consistency and integrity and eliminating any kind of biases or personal feelings? We're all human. We work closely together, and there are going to be feelings involved. And looking at things through different lenses, there are biases that are unconscious at times. And it's important to build that integrity to make sure that there's a process in place where they will not interfere when we look at standards, ethical standards, but enforcement of standards. Those enforcement of the standards, too, I look at is not just something from the leadership, but something that we look at as a community amongst all of our action teams, our leadership teams, and our daily interactions. So we need to intentionally look at how we look at these things through our different lenses. One of the things that I really looked at was through Shapiro and Stepanovich's look at their four lenses of justice. Through the four lenses, looking at it through justice, care, critique, and profession. The four lenses of ethics, I should say, with it. Those four lenses really help eliminate some of those biases. It takes those personal feelings out, and it gives a framework for questions. So that is something that not only as me as a leadership, to make sure the school understands those four lenses when looking at things. When we think of standards, yes, we do first look at it as justice. We look like, hey, is there a violation of standards? But then we also need to still look at, are there the other areas when I look at it through care and critique, and also through profession? Because then, besides just looking at the standards, we look at the enforcement of the standards, progressive discipline, if there is a violation of the standards, and for what comes next. I also looked at the leadership models and practices and decision-making protocols that needs to be consistent, not just as a leader, but also on our action teams. Those are things that are going to be proactive, but having those consistency so people know what to expect, they know the process of it. And last, for this part, for ethical leaderships, it's looking at our professional standards and ethics and codes of conduct, and that we always see in the beginning of the year during pre-planning. But as veteran teachers, also, it's the same each year. So we often click through it without thinking. I would want it to be part of not only the beginning of the year pre-planning, but also the mid-year. An important piece to me of that is not just going through signing off that we reviewed each one, but have a little scenario-based training When you go through scenarios, you start to think about the standard. You start to think about situations that you may have come across, whether it's yourself or someone else, and will help someone stop and reflect. So sometimes, many times, when there is a violation of a standard, it's often reactive. But if we think about things, we have a better chance of looking at things and not being so reactive. That leads to me the ethical team. Our ethical team is something that's really built upon to me and is going to create that leadership that's pervasive throughout the school. There's a few things that resonate with me when I look at the ethical team. It needs to be, when we look at our processes that we have in our school, the core values, our vision, it really needs to be created as one. One of the things that I looked at is the building process of a 3-level consensus building process, and that was done in Castle. With that, you would create small groups that would meet to discuss whether it's processes, procedures, or values. In this case, I'd be looking at creating a template, how we would address actions and consequences, but also for daily situations for us to review, and then also to create some core values that all of our teams and as a school that we would have. Creating that component in that system builds unity, but it's a norm that we will all follow to build that consistency, that transparency, but that which entails building that integrity. It also then eliminates that it's just something from the top down, and it is created through the whole organization, not just only as a process, but our values and our beliefs, what really is at the core of it. Another piece of that too is to have perception surveys. I think it's important to have surveys in the beginning of the year and then also at the end of the year. I learned a lot from the surveys. I like them to be anonymous so that people can give their honest feedback and we can see how they feel. But that baseline survey is going to serve as our guide. Hopefully, once we go through all these things and then we have the end of the year survey, we can use that as kind of our plan, do, check, act model of looking at, hey, where did we grow? How consistent were we? And then also, where do we need to get better? That creation of that ongoing plan, do, check, act builds that trust, builds the stance from an organization to have that continual cycle of improvement, but to me also sets that tone for building consistent leadership amongst the entire faculty and organization, but building that transparency and integrity and ultimately building that relational trust. As an organization, when we go through those things, it's then looking at, do we have something to follow, and also with consistency, how to evaluate things. So the one piece of it, as part of our crabapple playbook, I would be looking at creating a section in here just for our ethical standards, where we will have those templates and those core values for everyone to look at to start in the beginning of the year. Then us following through with consistency and visibility. So that's through, whether it's through walkthroughs, observations, feedback. And that is not just from the leadership standpoint, but also from any of our action teams, whether it's our leadership team, so it becomes common practice. Everybody is fluid with it, and they have the mindset of looking at it through these different lenses and then being able to address situations as they occur. But like I said before, to really address it and being a proactive end of it instead of a reactive end. When looking at our decisions, whether it's a violation of ethical standards or whether it's just looking at some of our values and standards and how were our choices and actions done and determined and the outcome of it. What I've really looked at is in the moral and managerial imperative model by Sir Giovanni, where it has the 4 quadrants of the moral on the top left, on the bottom left, neither moral nor effective, the bottom right, expedient, and the top right, where you want to be moral and effective. that would be a guide for me and for the team and for the organization of looking at our actions and whether they are, hey, is this immoral and ineffective? What is the outcome of it? Where did that outcome fall? I also look at this as not just looking at our personal actions, but when we look at progressive discipline and then the enforcement of any kind of ethical standards, what do we want the outcome to be? Yes, there's things in the justice outcome, but then also where is the care and the critique, and then us as a profession. This four sector quadrant to me really gives us a model to look at our choices and our actions. And then last, looking at our challenges and systems that we have in place. Okay, and this goes all the way back to the beginning. Leadership must build trust through the transparency and consistency. It is very easy in the time we are in to be distracted and to be reactive and to act before we think. So it's important as we set up all these systems, our templates, our core values, that we take the time to go back and to look at it, to maintain that consistency, to build that relational trust, not just amongst each other, but as an organization. Also, that mindset of a servant leadership. Servant leadership, also, it's talked about by Cervani. It's important and impactful of building that relationship with the staff and the community, because ultimately we are here to serve the students of our community. Everything that we do is for the best interest that we try for our students. It's a common thing of when we look at it, it says, what is best for students? And then last part for those challenges is to create a professional development system that can help us recognize any biases that we may have and looking at making our frameworks and ethical decision making even better than what we currently have. It's always a process of improvement and keeping that cycle of plan, do, check, act, and having everything in place as a team. Thank you, and that is my presentation on preventing inconsistent enforcement of ethical standards. Bye.